person lives 50 years, 40 years, as many years as you live. Now, when a person passes away, as one of the tenets of Jewish belief is reward and punishment. We speak of reward and punishment. There's liability for our misdeeds, and we're rewarded for our good deeds. You could either be punished in this world, or you can be punished in the world to come. Or a person can be punished in both worlds. Part of the payoff is payment that's here, the debt, and sometimes it's the world to come. Or sometimes here the person lives high on the hog, and it's all, the debt is paid in the world to come. It's what we call Gehenna, where the soul has to undergo a level of purging before, even if it's worthy to go to the world to come, as we'll discuss, the soul has to be purged before it's admitted into the world to come, which is called Gehenna. There's a work which we studied many years ago. It's called Tomid Dvorah, the palm tree of Dvorah. It's a Kabbalistic work. And he writes, we discuss what is the world to come. It's having a relationship with Hashem, which is a being who's absolute at every level of perfection, eternal being. And if you're able to be exposed to his presence, that's the ultimate reward. Well, let's say a person has an audience with a king, a mortal king, and you're not groomed and bathed and washed properly, and there's some degree of uncleanliness about you, it's inappropriate you should stand before the king. We read in the Torah when Yosef was in the dungeon for 12 years, and Paro became aware that he had the ability to interpret dreams. What does it say? He was rushed out of the dungeon. He was groomed, and he was clothed with appropriate clothing before he stood before the king. Because you can't come before even a mortal king unless you come in an appropriate appearance. And then this dialogue between Paro and Yosef began, whether he has the ability to help him interpret his dreams or not. So if a person comes before God and you have impurities of sin, which is considered a breach of God's will, and you're carrying it, it's obvious on your soul, you can't stand in the presence of God. You have to undergo a process called purging to extract that impurity, and only then, after it's been fully expunged, could you stand before God and have the relationship with God. He explains it with an allegory. Person has a white garment, pristine, snow white, which is the whitest white, and the center of the garment is a black, tiny blotch, black. And you can only see it from close up. Is pure as pristine that garment may be, because of that tiny little black spot in the center, it's inappropriate to stand before the king. So even that small, tiny spot has to be extracted, has to be restored to that pure whiteness. So we speak about a person has to go to Gehenna, spiritual purging. We're not speaking a person's a bad person, but you're not at a level which it's appropriate you should stand before God. So the Talmud tells us that a person is circumcised and you're a descendant of Avram, he stands at the entrance of hell, spiritual hell, and he does not allow his children to go into that location. Just being exposed to the entrance is already sufficient that everything's expunged from your soul to be worthy to enter immediately into the world to come. Of course, the person is truly evil. Avram is going to let the guy go straight through. But anybody who is like borderline, if a person did tshuva before he passed away, he's better than borderline. He's in a good place. The person didn't do tshuva. He couldn't care less. And his record is not so terrible. He would just be exposed to the outer location, and that's enough to purge whatever has to be purged. He needs serious purging because he's crossed that line too many times. Then he has to go into the hot bath, into that scalding bath to extract whatever that impurity was. Only then, if he's still worthy, he goes to the world to come. Some people forfeit their share in the world to come because they don't believe in God. They don't believe in the authenticity of Torah. They don't believe in many things. They don't believe in reward and punishment. Those people, they don't make it through the gates ever. Even after they go to Gehenna, they will not arrive where they should arrive. So when a person passes away, he goes into a holding pattern. It's called the soul world. In that soul world, the soul basks in a spiritual environment, which is the presence of God and all the good deeds in our life. It's very interesting. He explains, we have choice. Why do we have choice? If a person would have absolute clarity and understand the negative consequences and ramifications of sin, the person would never sin. If we were able to internalize that reality, for instance, a person has an inferno before his eyes and he has paradise to the other side. Is there a consideration he's going to the inferno? He understands clearly. You go into the inferno, you're going to be vaporized. You're going to be turned to dust, to ash. If a person would have that level of clarity of what sin is, under no circumstance is he crossing that line. But because the soul is embedded in a physical vessel, which is called the body, the soul doesn't have that sense of clarity at all. And therefore we have challenges, we have temptations, we have this tug of war, the struggle between the physical and the spiritual. The intellect, is the intellect influenced by the physical, and therefore we suppress the spiritual, or we say no, the intellect makes the right choice and the physical becomes spiritualized. Even in our physical existence, you put tefillin on your hand, you observe the Shabbat, you eat kosher, you study Torah, the mind is spiritualized, the body is spiritualized. All this contributing spiritual involvement elevates the physicality that has a capacity to have an appreciation for what right and wrong is within the spiritual context. That's what it is all about. Now, if a person does a mitzvah, we say, schar b'al maleko, even for the most minute mitzvah, there's not enough years of goodness in this world to compensate you for what you deserve. So when you do the mitzvah, and now your soul becomes embedded with that mitzvah, if that mitzvah would be permitted, allowed to expand, you know what would happen? The soul will achieve a level of such mega proportion and dimension, the body would not be able to contain that soul as a physical body. The body automatically will be overtaken and spiritualized. If that happens, the person no longer has free choice. So let's say you accumulate a whole lifetime studying Torah, doing mitzvahs, putting on tefillin, observing the Shabbos, dietary laws, doing acts of kindness, everything else. You have an unlimited amount of credit on your account. If those mitzvahs would be allowed in your lifetime to impact and expand to their fullest value, a person would become a spiritual being in this existence. But if that happens, you no longer have choice. So what does God do? God suppresses it. I'll give you an example. You take hay or straw and you pack it into a location. So if you want to fill in the location, because there's an expansion, you could pack it and compress it. And you put a tight lid on it. So everything is compressed in that location, which is limited, although it has the ability to expand, but because there's that tight lid on it and it's compressed into that very narrow location, it can't expand. The moment you take that lid off, what happens to that straw? It expands. The way God does it, the mitzvah we have, the mitzvah is condensed and compressed. Why? Because it would be allowed to expand. It would overtake the soul will become a mega soul, and it's full fleshed out. If that's the case, the body automatically would have such an infusion of spirituality, a person will no longer function as a physical being. He will have clarity, which within the human context, there's no such level of clarity of right and wrong. So if that's the case, we've defeated our purpose. So it's in a compressed state. But the moment the soul leaves the body, you know what happens? It expands. It expands to mega proportions. Proportions within the physical realm, there's no such, we can't even relate to that. Because in the spiritual realm, there's no limitation. And it will expand to the level of what was infused in that soul. The mitzvah, was it done with the proper intent? Was it done with love? Was it done with reverence? Whatever was inculcated in that mitzvah, it will manifest itself in the reality of the quality of that, and that's to that degree it will impact on that person's soul. The Talmud tells a story. A person passed away, the son of one of the great rabbis, and then he came back. So the father says to the son, "Son, what did you see over there?" "What did you see?" He says, "You know what I saw? Elyonim lamativ tachtonim lamalo. I saw people in this world who are low men on the totem pole. They were on top of the totem pole, and the people in this world who are on top of the totem pole, they were on the bottom of the totem pole." What does that mean? Yeah, look, a Jew looks like an ordinary person. Or you mean an ordinary person? Nobody knows who he is. And even himself, he himself doesn't even know who he is. People can be so special, and the only one who can make an evaluation of who that person is only God himself. As the Rambam had said earlier in Hilchos Tshuva, how do you categorize a person, tzaddik or rasha? He says it's not a quantitative evaluation, it's qualitative. He says you can do one mitzvah, which is the equivalent of endless sins. So therefore, when you put it on that scale, the positive outweighs the negative. That person's classification is tzaddik. And a person can do one sin with multiple mitzvahs. But because only God knows the innate negativity of that sin, that one sin can outweigh many mitzvahs. It's a qualitative evaluation. And who's the only one who can make this evaluation? Only God himself. No one else. So even the person does something, especially if he has humility, he doesn't think much of himself. All of a sudden he arrives there, all of a sudden he's a hero. You know, they're carrying him on their shoulders. You know, all of a sudden he's a mega person. He's the one in this world that's low man on totem pole. He's on top of the totem pole. There was a story in Europe, this is in the 1600s. There's a very, very wealthy Jew, he was observant, and he lived in a stone mansion, had great amounts of wealth, and whoever would ask him for charity, wouldn't give him charity, turned everybody down. He was like heartless. The chief rabbi of that community, his name was Reb Riol Sirkis, Sirkis. He's known, he has a commentary on the Shulchan Aruch called the Bach. The Bach was the father of the Taz, the Turei Zov, who was also a commentary on Shulchan Aruch. He was the chief rabbi. And when he passed away, he said the grave next to him in the cemetery should be left vacant. Shouldn't be occupied. And nobody understood why. And when this person passed away, this miser who behaved like the most heartless person, all of a sudden, the rabbi who passed away comes to somebody in a dream. He says, that grave is reserved for this person. So people couldn't believe it. And he has to be eulogized. Why? Because all the years, the one who underwrote this community, the poor, the widows, the orphans, the Torah institutions, it was this man. He didn't want to get an iota of credit or recognition for any mitzvah he did. So although they saw him in the negative, he's really a giant. He's a spiritual giant. Therefore, that grave next to my grave is reserved for him. So you understand? So are we in a position to pass judgment on anyone? Nobody ever knows what is and what's not. One action. Maybe you would have done it differently. That's what he chose. That's what he wanted to live his life, to be under the radar. Never anybody should recognize. He didn't want to have an iota of any recognition for any good deed that he did. But he was that giant. This guy in this world was subterranean. The way he was viewed and treated. Comes to the world to come, he's not on towards the top, he's on the top of the totem pole. So that happens. All of a sudden, there's a level of expansion. Until then, it's all compressed. It's not even noticeable on the person. We read that Yaakov believed his son Yosef was killed by a predator animal for 22 years. His brothers returned from Egypt, his children, and they tell their father, "Oh, Yosef Chai, Yosef is alive." And then when he sees the wagons, which Yosef sent for his father to bring him to Egypt, it says, then he believed. Why? Because the last thing Yosef had learned with his father were the laws of Egla Rufa, certain laws. So in Hebrew, the word Egla means Agola is a wagon. So the wagons alluded to the last thing. So he knew this is Yosef. And his prophetic connection came back, and that his spirit was enlivened. Okay? He sees Yosef, finally comes to Egypt. First, he hadn't seen his son in 22 years. And he says to his son, I never thought I'd see your face before I die. Now I see it. What's this all about? He's getting all emotional, Yaakov. So the Chaim HaKodesh writes that even though Yaakov was ecstatic that his son was alive, but the question was, after being in Egypt for 22 years, not in an appropriate environment, we're talking about this is the bastion of impurity. This is the abyss of spirituality. It's the location in terms there's a total spiritual void there, a vacuum. What did it do to my son? Is he the same son? He's not the same son. When he saw his face, and he cites tzaddikim, special people, special levels, they were able to see in a person's face his whole life on his face. Excuse me. When he saw Yosef's face, he saw he was not diminished as much as Nayota. I never thought I'd see your face, meaning to see you that you haven't been diminished as much as Nayota, even greater. Despite all the temptation, you remained Yosef, a tzaddik. You're still that devoutly righteous person, no less than you were when you left. That's what it says. I see your face before I died. I see you where you were and where you still are. But who recognizes what's on a person's face? He looks like a malnourished nobody. The man needs a handout. There's a story I once told over. There's a person who came to raise money in the United States to marry off a child. Okay? And he goes into a person's house, and the person writes him a check. So before he writes him the check, very wealthy man, observant man, before he writes him the check, he says, by the way, how many children do you have? He says, I have 10 children. So he writes him a check, and he could write him a $10,000 check. Writes him a check for $100. Why? He says to me, he says, the reason I'm giving you a check for $100 because you're coming back 9 more times because you have another 9 children to marry off. Therefore, I'm giving you a check only for $100. Either I give much more, but I know you're coming back. So this man was a very special man, the one who came to raise money for his child. He said, I want to explain you something. You're telling me the reason why you give me $100 is because I'm coming back. I want to ask you a question. Who said when I come back, who said you're still going to be alive? Who said you're going to be able to write the next 9 checks? Maybe you're not going to be here. Maybe the reason why I'm here is to give you an opportunity to help somebody who's in need. And you know something? You can take your check back. I'm not interested in $100 because I'm not sure if next time I come, you're even going to be here. When he said that to this man, it was like right between the eyes. He shook him up. It says, give me back the check. Wrote him a $10,000 check. You understand? I mean, how do you talk this way? You're not coming, you're coming back there from giving $100 check. Because, yeah, but who said you're going to be here? You mean you're so sure you're going to be here to be able to help me next 9 weddings? Who said you'll be here? But people believe. I am, because I have the ability to write the check. Yeah, but you can only write the check as long as you're alive. If you're not alive any longer, you can't write the check. And what happens if you have a financial reversal? You also can't write the check. But he gave him the bottom line answer. Who said you'll be a period? No, we get caught up with our foolishness, with our nonsense. We think we are who we think we are, which we're not. We don't have a right to even speak this way. It's a level of arrogance. But you know, his name is blazoned in the synagogue. Donated the parochis, the curtain for the Aron, for the ark. His name's on the outside of the building, you know. But they put on, you know, Oliver Sholem, you know. They may put that after the name, a blessed memory. So again, to be able to go into the world to come, it's not a simple matter. The simple guy he may get royal honor, God bringing him in there. The other person who thinks he's this and that, you never know. That's the reason why the Rambam writes, cites a verse from Koheles. Shlomo says, you should always keep your garments pristine white. Always, because you never know when that last moment's going to be. Don't give yourself the benefit of the doubt. Somebody else you should give a benefit of the doubt, but yourself, you can't take any chance. You always have to hedge your bet against every possible reality that maybe it's not what you think it is. You got to cover your bases. You got to shore it up to the nth degree. Because you never know what checkout time is. And even when you know what checkout time is, you know what you're checking into. Are you checking into, God forbid, a subterranean location? Or are you going to the penthouse? Or maybe they're taking you to the penthouse and they're going to throw you off the roof. You never know where you're going. And these are all realities of every one of us. Every one of us. If we could have helped somebody, we didn't help someone. And because we didn't help them, that person had suffered tremendously. That suffering is attributed to the person who could have and did not. Although he's not even aware of it. And sometimes you do a good deed, and you don't even realize the ramifications of that good deed. It's endless. The Chafetz Chaim writes that if a person pays the tuition and provides a Jewish education for a person who was not observant, and because of that, that person became observant, and he raises an observant family, and then multiple generations as a result of that initial financial assistance, all the mitzvahs till the end of time, which come through this family, accrue to that first person who paid that first tuition. You understand what this is? It's not to be believed. Let's see, the 10,000 descendants for the next few generations. Every mitzvah they do accrues to this person because they're only doing it because he provided the means for that first person to get that Torah education. So, you know, how do you make such a calculation? You never know.